The shortest verse in the Bible is 2 words. You probably know them. Jesus wept. Most people treat it like a footnote, a curiosity. The verse Sunday school kids memorize because it is easy. But if you slow down long enough to ask why? Why the Son of God, who knew what was about to happen, who had already told his disciples that this situation would not end in death? Why he stood at the edge of a tomb and let the tears come anyway? The answer will change the way you read everything else. This is not a video about a single verse. This is a video about a pattern. 3 moments in the life of Jesus where he wept. 3 different Greek words. 3 very different kinds of grief. And a radius that starts with one man in a burial cave and expands until it covers you. There is one moment, not in Matthew, not in Mark, not in Luke, not in John, where we hear Jesus weeping so violently that the writer uses a word that means screaming. Most Christians have never read it. We will get there, but not yet. First, we go to Bethany. The town is small, 2 miles east of Jerusalem, on the slope of the Mount of Olives, tucked into a fold of limestone hills. The historian Josephus knew this area well. He wrote about the villages on the eastern slope of Olivet, places where people lived close to the road and close to the dead. Burial caves were cut directly into the rock. You walked past them on the way to market. A man named Lazarus lives here, or rather, he lived here. He has been dead for 4 days. 4 days matters. The rabbis of the first century taught that the soul hovered near the body for 3 days after death, hoping to return. By day 4, the soul had departed. The body had begun to decay. When Martha says to Jesus, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor," she is not being squeamish. She is saying, "It is too late. Whatever you could have done, the window has closed." You need to understand the weight of those 4 days to understand why what happens next costs something. Jesus receives word that Lazarus is sick while he is on the other side of the Jordan River, and he waits. He waits 2 full days before he moves. His disciples are baffled. His friends are dying, and Jesus waits. By the time he arrives in Bethany, Martha comes out to meet him on the road. She does not run. She walks. She is a woman who has been holding a household together for 4 days of grief while also managing the expectation that her rabbi, the one people were calling the Son of God, had not come. She says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." 6 words that carry everything. Not an accusation, not quite, but not an accusation either. She believes in him. She is also furious. She is also broken. And Jesus does not correct her. He does not explain himself. He simply says, "Your brother will rise again." She thinks he means the resurrection at the end of days, the general one, the someday in the future one. He means Thursday. Then Mary comes. Mary, who in another scene will pour an entire jar of perfume worth a year's wages onto Jesus' feet and wipe them with her hair. Mary, who is the one in this family who cannot hold herself together, she falls at his feet. She says the exact same words her sister said, word for word. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And something happens to Jesus when he sees her weeping. The text says he was deeply moved in his spirit. The Greek word is embrimomai. It means something closer to anger than sadness, a groaning, a fury at what death does to people, at what grief looks like on the face of someone you love. "Stay with me." He asks where they have laid him. "Come and see," they say. And then, in the middle of a moment when he already knows the ending, when he has already told his disciples this will not end in death, when the miracle is literally minutes away, Jesus weeps. The Greek word is edakrusen, from dakruo. It is not the word for loud, heaving sobs. It is the word for silent tears, the kind that move down a face without sound, the kind that come when grief overwhelms you before you can stop it. The crowd watches. Some of them say, "See how he loved him." Others say, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" They are asking the same question you might be asking right now. If he knew, if he could, why weep? Here is what most people miss. Jesus does not weep because he has forgotten the resurrection is coming. He weeps because the resurrection being minutes away does not make the grief in that courtyard less real. Mary is still on the ground. The cave still smells. Death has still done what death does to people. It has taken something irreplaceable and left behind a wound that nothing in this world can close. He enters the grief before he ends it, not because he has to, because he chooses to. The God who is about to speak a dead man back to life stops first to stand in the weight of what death feels like to the people who loved him. He could have arrived in Bethany and gone straight to the tomb, said the word, walked away. He did not. He sat with the grief first. You may be in a season right now where you have prayed for something and it has not come, where the cave still smells, where the 4 days feel like 40, where the person you love is not coming back, or the situation has not turned, or the miracle you were told to believe for has not arrived. And you have done what Martha did. You have walked out to meet Jesus on the road and said, with as much faith as you could manage through clenched teeth, Lord, if you had been here. What happens next is important. He does not tell you to stop grieving. He grieves with you. That is the first weeping. Silent tears at one grave, one man, one family. A God who enters pain before he ends it. But the radius is about to expand. 5 days later, Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. You know this scene. Palm branches on the road, cloaks spread in the dust, a crowd that has grown enormous, partly because word has spread about Lazarus, partly because Passover is drawing pilgrims from across the empire, partly because something in the air feels like it is about to break open. People are shouting. The noise is enormous. The Pharisees push through the crowd toward Jesus and say, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Jesus answers, "If they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." It is one of the most cinematic lines he ever speaks, and nobody in that crowd notices what is happening on his face. He is weeping, not the silent tears of Bethany. The Greek word here is eklasin, from kleio. This is the word used for mourners at a Jewish funeral. Loud, heaving, audible grief. The kind of weeping you cannot hide. The kind that shakes your shoulders. The kind that makes people stop what they are doing and stare. The crowd is cheering. Jesus is sobbing. Luke is the only gospel writer who records this moment. He slows the triumphal entry down and shows you what is happening on the inside of it. While the disciples celebrate and the Pharisees complain and the children wave branches, Luke pulls the camera back and shows you the face of Jesus. And on that face, tears. He looks out over the city and says something that should stop you cold. If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. He is not speaking metaphorically. In the year 70 AD, approximately 40 years after this moment, the Roman general Titus surrounds Jerusalem with exactly what Jesus describes: an embankment, a siege wall. The city is sealed. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. The historian Josephus, who was there, who witnessed it, who wrote about it in his Jewish War with the kind of detail that only someone present could provide, records that 1.1 million people died in the siege. Most of them were Jewish pilgrims who had come to Jerusalem for Passover and could not leave. Children, families, the temple, the most sacred structure in the Jewish world, the house where God was said to dwell, was burned to the ground. The Roman soldiers tore it apart, stone by stone, looking for melted gold. Jesus sees all of this from the back of a donkey. He sees the mothers. He sees the children against the walls. He sees the temple burning. He sees everything that is coming for this city that is currently throwing a parade in his honor. And he weeps over it. Here's what that means. The Hebrew word shalom, which your English Bible usually translates as peace, does not mean simply the absence of conflict. Shalom means wholeness, completeness, every broken thing restored, every missing piece returned, every wound healed. It is the word for a life in which nothing is missing and nothing is broken. And Jesus looks at Jerusalem and says, "You could have had this. You could have had shalom, and instead, what is coming is the opposite of it. He is not angry when he says this, he is grieving. And this is where it gets remarkable. At Bethany, Jesus wept for one man, one family, one village outside the city walls. The grief was intimate, personal, quiet. The silent tears of someone who loved Lazarus and loved Mary and loved Martha and stood at the edge of what death had done to them. Here the radius expands. He is weeping for an entire city, hundreds of thousands of people, most of whom do not know his name, many of whom will, within 5 days, be shouting for his crucifixion. He weeps for the people who are about to kill him. He weeps for the city that will reject him, the leaders who will hand him over, the crowds who will choose Barabbas. He sees what is coming for them, not just in AD 70, but in eternity, and the grief of it breaks him open in the middle of a parade. You need to sit with that for a moment. He is not weeping for himself. He knows what is coming for him too. The arrest, the trials, the cross. None of that makes him weep here. What makes him weep is the thought of what is coming for them, for the city, for the people. That is not a feeling you can manufacture. That is not a feeling you can decide to have. You do not choose to sob over the people who are planning your execution. That grief comes from somewhere so deep that it has no floor. Pay attention to this. The Pharisees are worried about crowd control. The disciples are excited about the kingdom. The pilgrims are waving branches. And Jesus, the one this entire moment is supposed to be about, is the only person in the scene who understands what is actually happening. He is the only one who sees all the way to the end, and what he sees makes him weep. There is something almost unbearable about that image, a man riding toward his own death, weeping, not for himself, but for the city that will kill him, weeping because he can see 40 years into the future and he knows what is coming. Weeping because the people cheering him loudest are the people who are about to lose everything, and they do not know it yet. And there is nothing he can do to stop what their choices have set in motion. Eusebius, the early church historian writing in the 3rd century, reflected on this passage and said something the church has largely forgotten. The grief of Christ over Jerusalem is not a historical curiosity. It is a window into the heart of God toward every city, every generation, every people who have been offered peace and chosen something else. Every city, every generation, that means yours. Think about the place you live. Think about the people around you, the ones who are busy, distracted, exhausted, chasing things that will not satisfy them, building lives on ground that will not hold. Jesus looks at that too, not with judgment, not with the cold calculation of someone tallying up failures, with tears, with the same Clio that shook his shoulders on the road into Jerusalem. He sees what is coming before you arrive there. He weeps over it before you even know to be afraid. That is the second weeping, loud sobs over an entire city, a God who grieves not just for the people who love him, but for the people who will reject him. The radius has expanded from one man to hundreds of thousands, but it is not done expanding. There is one more weeping, the one I told you about at the beginning, the one not found in any of the 4 Gospels, the one with the word that means screaming. There is a letter in the New Testament that most people skip. It sits between the book of Philemon and the book of James. It has no clear author. Scholars have debated for 2,000 years whether it was Paul or Apollos or someone else entirely, and it reads like a sermon more than a letter. Dense, layered, written for people who already knew their scripture deeply and needed someone to show them what it meant. The letter is Hebrews. And in the 5th chapter, almost in passing, the writer says something that should have stopped the church cold for 20 centuries. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. Read that again. Fervent cries and tears. The Greek word for fervent cries is krauga. It does not mean quiet prayer. It does not mean whispered petition. Krauga means an outcry, a loud cry. In other places in the New Testament, it is used for the shout of a crowd, the cry of a person in anguish, the scream of someone who has reached the end of what they can bear. Combined here with dakrion, tears, it describes something almost impossible to hold in your mind, the Son of God, on his face in a garden, screaming and weeping. This is not the Jesus of the paintings, not the calm figure with soft light around his head, hands folded, expression serene. This is a man in the dirt, with sweat on his face and tears he cannot stop, and a sound coming out of him that his disciples, sleeping 30 yards away, can probably hear. Luke tells us, in the most clinical, almost reluctant way, that his sweat became like drops of blood. The medical term is hematidrosis. It is a documented condition. Under extreme psychological stress, the capillaries beneath the skin can rupture and mix with the sweat glands, producing a bloody sweat. It has been recorded in soldiers before battle, in prisoners before execution, in people whose minds have come to the absolute edge of what a human being can endure. Jesus experienced it in a garden while his friends slept. Peter is there. Peter, who hours earlier had been ready to fight the entire Roman army, who had said at the supper table, "Even if everyone else falls away, I will not." Peter is asleep. Jesus walks back to him 3 times across that garden. 3 times he finds him sleeping, and 3 times he returns to the dirt and the dark and the prayer that is more scream than words. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." He is not performing grief here. He is not modeling emotional availability for a future sermon series. He is a man, fully man, as the writer of Hebrews insists, in every way, who is facing something so catastrophic, so total, so absolute, that his body is bleeding through his skin, and his voice has gone past words into something the Greek language calls krog. And here is where the open loop closes. I told you at the beginning that there was a weeping not found in the 4 Gospels, a weeping with a word that means screaming. This is it. Gethsemane, the garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives, not far from Bethany, where Lazarus was raised, not far from Jerusalem, where Jesus wept over the city. All 3 moments within a few miles of each other, a triangle of grief drawn across the same hillside. Now watch what happens when you see all 3 together. Bethany, one man, silent tears, a God who enters the grief of one family before he ends it. Jerusalem, one city, loud, heaving sobs, a God who weeps over hundreds of thousands of people who are about to reject him. Gethsemane, all of humanity, screaming and tears, a God who takes every grief that has ever existed or will ever exist and carries it on his own body in a garden at midnight. The radius completes, from one man to one city to every person who has ever lived. Augustine, writing in The City of God, pushed back against the Stoic philosophers of his time who taught that the truly wise person feels nothing, that emotion is weakness, that grief is a failure of reason. Augustine pointed to Gethsemane and said, "The God who made the human heart also wept with it." If the Son of God screamed in a garden, then grief is not a character flaw. It is not a lack of faith. It is not something to be ashamed of or managed or hidden away before anyone sees it. It is something God himself has done. Here is the part nobody tells you. Jesus did not weep at the tomb of Lazarus because he had temporarily forgotten that resurrection was coming. He wept because he refused to skip the grief to get to the miracle. He entered the pain fully, completely, without shortcutting it, and then he raised the dead. He did not weep over Jerusalem because he had lost hope for the city. He wept because he could see everything. The choice the city was making, the consequences that would follow, the AD 70 destruction, the centuries of exile, and love did not allow him to watch it unmoved. Love that sees the ending and still grieves the path is not weak love. It is the strongest kind. And in Gethsemane, he did not scream because he was losing faith in the Father. He screamed because he was carrying something no human being has ever been asked to carry. Every sin, every wound, every grave, every moment of grief in every human life, from the first breath in Eden to the last breath before the resurrection. He took all of it into that garden and he carried it through. He did not put it down. There are three things I want you to leave with. The first is this: grief is not the opposite of faith. Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb, knowing the resurrection was 4 minutes away. If the Son of God allowed himself to feel the full weight of death before he undid it, then you are not failing God when you grieve. You are not showing weak faith when you cry. You are not spiritually immature because the loss is still a loss, even though you believe in the resurrection. Jesus stood at the edge of a grave and let the tears come. You are allowed to do the same. The second is this: he sees what is coming for you before you arrive there. He looked out over Jerusalem and wept over a destruction that was 40 years away. The city had no idea. The crowd was cheering, and Jesus was already grieving what he could see on the road ahead of them. If you are in a season of unknowing, if you cannot see past the next week, the next conversation, the next appointment, he sees all the way to the end of your story. And whatever he sees, he does not watch it unmoved. He weeps over it before you even know to be afraid. That is not a distant God calculating outcomes. That is a God who loves you the way you love the people you cannot stop thinking about. The third, and I want you to hear this one carefully, is the one that should change everything. The God of the universe has cried. Not metaphorically, not poetically, not as a theological concept to be examined and categorized and filed away. He stood at a grave and silent tears moved down his face. He sat on a donkey above a city and sobbed loud enough for Luke to record it 2,000 years later. He lay in a garden on a dark Thursday night and screamed until his skin bled. That means that whatever you are carrying right now, whatever grave you are standing at, whatever city you are grieving, whatever garden you have been in alone at midnight, you have not been there alone. You have never been there alone. Before you knew the words for what you were feeling, before you could name the loss or the fear or the ache that will not leave, he was already in it with you, already weeping, already carrying the weight of it in a way that you, in your most honest moment, know you cannot carry yourself. You have never grieved alone. That is what 2 words in the shortest verse in the Bible are trying to tell you. Not that Jesus had feelings, not that God is relatable, not that Scripture is emotionally sophisticated, that he loved you enough to weep. And the same God who wept at one grave and over one city and in one garden is the same God who will one day wipe every tear from every eye. Not because tears are weakness, but because by then there will be nothing left to weep over. Every broken thing restored, every missing piece returned. Shalom, at last, complete. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, "He wept." No explanation needed, just those 2 words. And if you know someone who is in their own Gethsemane right now, someone who is in the dirt at midnight and cannot see past the garden, share this with them. Not because it will fix anything, but because sometimes the most important thing a person needs to know is that they are not alone in the dark. We will see you in the next one.